great. Dr. Grethel Bradford is a counseling psychologist and professor at the Washington Adventist University School of Arts and Social Sciences and the School of Graduate and Professional Studies. She is a Maryland licensed clinical professional counselor, a certified trauma professional, and Maryland state approved clinical supervisor in the clinical mental health counseling. She has provided clinical and therapeutic services to individuals, groups, and families, and she also provides supervision to licensed graduate and professional counselors on track for full clinical state licensure. Dr. Bradford's combined experience as an educator, having worked with students from preschool to the graduate level, and as a clinician, spans almost 40 years. She's the chairperson of JDTAN's Behavioral Taskforce and vice chairperson of JDTAN, the Jamaica Diaspora Taskforce Action Network. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present Dr. Grethel Bradford to speak about creating trauma-sensitive schools. Dr. Bradford?
Thank you, Carleen. Good evening, or no, it's not evening yet, is it? It's not 6 o'clock yet. It's good afternoon, everyone. I know you're laughing at me, Dwayne. Is it that I am expecting the day to over too quickly, or what?
Yes, I think so.
You know, in Jamaica, the thing is that we say good evening once it's after 12 o'clock anyway, right? Good afternoon, everyone, again, and it is a pleasure to be here to talk about something that I really am fascinated by and that I'm an advocate for, and that is how to work with children who have experienced trauma. So I am going to start sharing my screen in a while, but what I would like is for you to, Dr. Dwayne, you know, I call you Dwayne, I call you Dr. Dice, which one do I call you? Dwayne. What I would like is for the questions to be placed, you know, in order, and then at the end of it, then you can now ask me the questions. Okay. I am hoping that I'll be able to go through it, and I do tend to talk a lot, but guess what? I have my clock to keep me time in, right? And to make sure that I am right on time. So I'm going to share my screen with you in a minute. Share and slideshow. Okay, so I would like to talk with you then about trauma, a little bit about trauma and the importance of creating trauma-sensitive schools. You might hear different words for it. You might hear things like terms such as trauma-sensitive communities, trauma-sensitive schools, trauma-informed schools. And basically, they are the same thing. But what they really are schools that actively seek to stop the traumatizing of children who are already traumatized. They are institutions that help children to express their emotions, help them by acting out whatever it is, but also allowing them the space to explain and to understand what is going on with them. There are also institutions that create socially and emotionally safe environments. So when the child is acting out, or the teacher does not understand what is going on, the child needs a safe place where they can process their information, and not only that, where learning can take place. So what are my objectives then? I want to be able this afternoon to identify the components of trauma, of a trauma-sensitive school or trauma-sensitive schools. I want to be able to describe the impact that trauma has on the children's learning. And I can't go a lot in detail, but I will definitely touch on it. I will also provide some strategies for the creation and the maintaining of trauma-sensitive schools. My hope is that as I go through and the questions come through, I can expand on what I want to share with you. So here are some questions that I want you to contemplate as we go forward. Do you have children in your school? And I think almost everybody will say yes. And if you have said yes to all these questions that I asked, then I think that you can safely say that we need to have trauma-sensitive schools. Do you have children in your school who show signs of trauma? Have you as a teacher, as a principal, as an administrator, felt overwhelmed by the behaviors of the traumatized children in your school? Have you ever felt that you did not get the kind of support you needed from administrators, if you're a classroom teacher, from the parents and from your colleagues when you try to tackle the issues that these traumatized children present? And lastly, do you think that it is possible to create and sustain a trauma-sensitive school? So these questions I really want you to look at. I want you to think about them, and then I want you to share some of your experiences as you go along. So, you know how we walk around every day and things happen to us, and someone asks you, how are you doing? And the first thing you will say is, man, I'm just stressed. I am so stressed. Well, you know, when we think of our children, we have to be able to differentiate the stress from what trauma is. What is trauma? What is it? And why is it that we should be engaged in a very sustained and a very consistent way to ensure that our schools are trauma sensitive? And so I'm going to start off with exactly what trauma is. There are several definitions, but I thought these two definitions encapsulate all of what trauma is. You can think of it as an exceptional experience in which powerful and dangerous events overwhelm a person's capacity to cope. And the words that I want you to really pay attention to is powerful, dangerous, and the capacity to cope. It could be just a single event. It could be multiple events. It is also seen, according to SAMHSA, as a set of circumstances that is experienced by the individual, and it is physically and emotionally harmful or threatening. Now, the child can also perceive it as a threat, but the child experiences it as a threat as well. It is going to have long-lasting adverse effects on the individual, their personal, their social, their emotional, and their spiritual well-being. So when our children come to us and we see them acting in a particular way, they behave in ways that we don't understand. One of the things that we ask ourselves is, did something happen to this child? How strong was the impact on the child? How long will it last? Because if it happened only once, we might be able to deal with it. The child might be able to deal with it through his or her coping mechanisms over a period of time. But if there are multiple events and the child's whole being is being impacted, then it means then that the child is not going to be able to learn. So what does trauma do? I want you to look at this sort of drawing of the brain. In the middle, between the left brain and the right brain, we have something called the corpus callosum. And it is that set of nerves that really kind of link the left side and the right side of the brain. Now, the left side of the brain allows us to think in logical ways, to think and to operate in a sequential ways, just understand things in logical ways. It allows us also to be analytical. It allows us to be objective, to see things and to say, does this make sense? That doesn't make sense. And let's see what makes sense. It also allows us to think in a linear kind of way. Now, the right side of the brain is just a little bit different. And, you know, as Christians and as people who are spiritual, we always think of how wonderfully we are all made. And this brain of ours is what directs all of our activities. So the right side, on the other hand, is more holistic. It sees things in a bigger pattern. It's creative, it's emotional, it's intuitive, and it is also subjective. So when we talk about something like the subjective brain, we're talking about the brain that sees it from my perspective. I see this experience from my perspective. I don't want to hear what the other person is saying. And this is what trauma does. It takes the child that sits in front of you and it separates the right side of the brain from the left side of the brain. And so when the emotions take over, the logical part is not able to make the connections. The neurons that are there and the neural pathways that connects both sides just don't seem to work. And so when you see a child who has experienced trauma, one of the first things you want to say is that the brain in its function is being disconnected in some way, shape, or form. So your children come to you, and when they come to you, they experience all different types of trauma. You may have abuse, you may have neglect, you may have household dysfunctions. Many of your children from day one, they are beaten by their parents, by their guardians. They are abused by people in their communities. And so they experience physical abuse. They also experience emotional abuse. Many of them come and, you know, people look at them and they tell them that there are all kinds of this. There's verbal abuse as well. And children are not given the love, the attention that they so deserve. So you will see children, they sit by themselves. You will see those who do not know how to connect with other people. And so they are physically neglected. You can know as school teachers when they come in front of you. And I remember when I used to teach elementary school, and I could tell those children who were not taken care of. When you look at the uniforms, when you look at the food they, you know, when you look at their bodies, you could see that they weren't fed properly. The children who are emotionally abused, who are not given the kind of love and attention that they need. Some of them you will see will experience not just physical, not just emotional, not just physical, right? You will see them being neglected and abused. But another thing that will happen is that sometimes they are just bystanders and they are looking at what is going on around them in the home, in the community. You may have parents, relatives who have some sort of mental illness. You may have parents who are, or family members who are in and out of jail, people who are involved in all kinds of criminal activities, as well as parents who are not getting along too well, parents who are always arguing, always fighting, always having some kind of interaction or inter-exchanges that really kind of throw the child's world apart. So what do you do then? We have to stop and think, what are the needs of our children? So here we have children who are abused every day. What we want to look at is, what are their needs? What are the needs? We can say, well, there is one set that are experienced what we call adverse childhood experiences, but we can also look at the other side, that when our children are born, when they come to us, there are certain needs that must be fulfilled. And I particularly love Maslow's hierarchy of needs because he talks about the physiological needs, the safety needs, the belonging needs, the esteem needs, and also the needs to achieve their potential. And we have school because we want our children to achieve the highest level that they can achieve. We want them to be the best that they can be. But the reality is that as school teachers, we see the results of adverse childhood experiences. We see all that happens when they're neglected, when they're abused, when they cannot figure out who to trust, when they are being harmed on a day-to-day basis. But we also need to understand that these childhood experiences can last for a very, very long time. And it starts with disrupting their neurodevelopment. It means the brain doesn't work. And there is a belief, there is a saying, in fact, that wherever the trauma occurs, that's where the development stops. And that is kind of hard to imagine, but just imagine when a child is, by the time they're, say, 5 years old, they have at least 95 to 98% of the capacity of the adult brain. And if they are exposed to early trauma and their development is stopped at where that trauma occurs, it means that when they come to school, when they come to you as teachers, there's going to be a lot of catching up to do. So here they have this disrupted neurodevelopment as a result of the trauma. And then their social life gets interrupted as well. Their emotional life gets interrupted. They start experiencing different types of cognitive impairment, and they now are set, in fact, for being involved in different health risk behaviors. And I'm sure that some of you can think about some of them. Children who will self-harm, children who will go out and they will use drugs. They're trying to cope with what is going on. And as they get more used to the things that are not so good for them, those health risk behaviors, then it makes them more susceptible to death, to various illnesses. You know, when this study was done, they were looking at physical illnesses. But as they went along and NIH did the various studies on adverse childhood experiences, they started realizing something important, that the mental capacity of the individuals get diminished as well. And it kind of makes sense, because if the brain is not functioning as it should, if it's not firing, if all those neurons are not firing as they should, then it's likely that decision making is going to be a problem when you get to the teenage years, when you should be in that stage where you can think at a formal stage, where you can think logically. And if there has been problems and the process was not able to go through as it should, then you can see where we can really start having problems in terms of behaviors, in terms of perceptions, in terms of thoughts as well. So, of course, it's going to impact learning, and you're all teachers. So I think that this is where we're going to really kind of focus for a while. One of the things that happen as a result of trauma is that you're going to have lower learning outcomes. The children are not going to learn at the rate that you expect them to learn. So you can bring all the great material that a 7 or an 8 or a 9-year-old child should be exposed to. But if there is abuse or neglect, then you are going to find that the child is going to learn at a much slower rate. And so they are going to have a higher rate of learning problems. But for my field, what really impacts me the most is that we will also find more people, more children, more teenagers coming into us, and even adults, young adults coming in with various mental health disorders and behavioral challenges. You'll find the behavioral challenges mostly with the younger teenagers and stuff like that. So you might find teenagers being diagnosed with conduct disorder, oppositional defiance disorder. You will find the younger children having this, being prescribed with, diagnosed with ADHD, and teenagers with delinquency. Now, there's a question that people are asking now, and they are still doing a lot of research about this. It's about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. There was a time when people thought that only adults experience post-traumatic stress disorder, but that is not so. Post-traumatic stress means that something happened to you, and every time you sense something, whether it's through your smell, through sight, through touch, or whatever, you are going to respond. And so there might be various things in your environment that will impact the way that you respond to your world. So now you have children coming to you who have experienced abuse, neglect, and also who might have experienced things that, you know, are just kind of like hard for some of us to imagine. And when they come, you don't know what to do. You are there to teach them. That's what you're there for. And so the behaviors come and you're trying to understand what it is. So why is this child, for example, I tell him to sit down and he won't sit down. I tell him to take his book out. He will not take his book out. In fact, he will ask me, why should I take my book out? What is this all about? And they might even become confrontational, and they might defy you. Now, ADHD is interesting. A lot of work has been done with ADHD. And in fact, some of the research show that you find an increase at about age 7, 8, 9, 10. That's about when people start really diagnosing children with ADHD. And we found also in the United States that younger children are being diagnosed with it. Now, I'm not going to go on that road because I have a whole platform about ADHD. My basic tenet, though, is that when a child comes to you and they have attention hyperactivity disorder, then or hyperactivity, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it is important for you to understand what the trauma is that the child might have experienced. I wanted to sort of make a connection between trauma and ADHD because, like I said, it's one of those areas that I am truly, truly interested in. When you see the child sitting in front of you, know that the child who has been diagnosed with ADHD and the child who has experienced trauma will have certain similarities. So for trauma, the child might experience, there are symptoms, there are signs. So the symptoms that the child may have would be feelings of fear, feelings of helplessness, uncertainty, and vulnerability. The child who is traumatized is hurt by someone who they're supposed to trust, someone with whom they should be feeling safe with. But they have been, how would I say, betrayed by those who should know better. You might also see as a sign that there is increased arousal. The child might be very edgy. They might be agitated, easily agitated. They will seek, in fact, to avoid any reminder of the trauma. And the reminders can come through the senses. Say, for example, a child might smell an orange and the child responds in an agitated way, or the child tries to move away from where the smell is. What could be happening is that when the trauma occurred, the smell of sense picked that orange up, right? And the child will always remember the trauma whenever they smell the orange. Sounds and taste and all of that. So the child you might never get a child to eat an orange, for example. And I know this is a little bit simplistic, but these are reminders. And sometimes we don't know what the triggers are, but the children, in fact, will try to avoid them. And I'm going to get to how we now can ensure that when these triggers come, how we can work with the children. They might be irritable. They might be quick to anger. And I always say that there is no bad emotion. Anger is not a bad emotion. Frustration is not a bad emotion. We put the label bad on it because in our society, if we show that we are angry, then it means that we are a danger to other people. But anger in and of even experience feelings of dissociation. That means that they feel as if they're kind of living outside their bodies. You know, when children are around 4, 5 years old, they are very, very, very imaginative. And all the basic school teachers and kindergarten teachers can tell you the joys and the wonders of working with children with that level of imagination. However, when children are experiencing trauma, they will also disassociate from the real world. Sometimes they feel that the world is not real around them, and they can start creating stories. They can create scenarios, I'll say scenarios, that do not necessarily seem true for you, but is in fact true for that child. They may constantly be on the alert for any kind of threat or danger, and that's where the hypervigilance will come in. This is where you will walk towards a child and you will see the child do something like that, and the child might physically respond because they are on the alert that something is going to happen to them. They may become unusually reckless and aggressive, and they may even become self-destructive as well. Now, that's trauma over there, but it overlaps with ADHD because the children who sit in front of you now will have problems concentrating and learning in school. They become distracted very easily. They don't seem to listen to you. And I've heard teachers say, why does no one just listen? Boy, did you hear what I said to you? I said that 3 or 4 times. And sometimes it's not that they're not listening. It's just that they're sometimes just caught up in their own world. They might be hyperactive and restless. And one of the things that parents actually can identify is that the children don't sleep so well. What can the teachers identify? Where the child sleeps a lot in class. So if the trauma occurred at home, if the trauma occurred with someone who they trusted and that person is in their environment all the time, then that child is going to be in that state of hypervigilance. And when they come to school, they're just plain simply tired, okay? ADHD is another aspect of trauma. So children may have problems just following simple instructions. They might fidget, they may squirm, they may talk all the time. They get up out of their seat, they interrupt, they intrude on others. They don't seem to have a sense of boundaries. And teachers will look at this and wonder, what is this? Is this ADHD or is this a result of trauma? So as you look at this chart, you can see that there are overlaps, but there are also things that are unique to ADHD and some that are unique to trauma. I talked a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder. And like I said, some people are still questioning whether post-traumatic stress can happen in children. And I can tell you that it does. How do you know this? You might find, similar to ADHD, you might find the child has difficulty concentrating. They might isolate themselves. And you'll find this mostly with the older kids. For the younger kids, you might hear that they have nightmares. Sometimes they'll come to you as a teacher and they will tell you their dreams. And they will tell you about the boogeyman and the this and the that, the ducky man or the this or the black heart man or whoever it is. And they usually, I can tell you this, children want to tell you what is going on with them, but very often they don't know how to do it. As they get older, they start becoming more fearful. When a child hits 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, their self-esteem becomes really important to them. They start building up a sense of who they are. And so if bad things happen to them, and they are fearful that the things will keep on happening, then after a while, they can develop a sense of helplessness. You will find also that they will eat a whole lot less. Teenagers, on the other hand, may even turn to drug use. And when they turn to it, you want to find out, what happened? What happened? Why is this child using the drug? And sometimes we look at them and say, oh, well, they're just bad and they're just following company and whatever. But is it because of the trauma that they have experienced? So let's talk a little bit then about the trauma-sensitive approach, now that I've given you the background to the children who come to you with trauma. The trauma-sensitive approach delivers education with an understanding of trauma and an awareness of its impact across various settings, services, and population. So when we are going to create a trauma-sensitive environment, we have to understand it, that it's not just going to be in the school. It's not going to be just in the home. It's not just the teacher and the parents. It's going to involve clinicians as well, the guidance counselors. It's going to involve all the services that are available. The Ministry of Education has to come in. The JTA has to come in. And so we have to see it as an endeavor that pulls everybody together. It also recognizes that the role that culture plays, and culture can be what happens in the home. Every home has a different culture. So in one home where trauma occurs, the child might be told that he cannot say anything or he will get in trouble, and there is a culture of secrecy. In another setting, you might find the child experiences the trauma, talks about it, and it is dealt with by the family members in a way that will protect the child. So when I'm talking about culture, I'm not talking about, you know, the culture we talk about in the United States. I'm talking about the home culture, the community culture, the nation's culture. Also, we have to look at ecology. We have to look at how the person interacts with his or her environment. And we also have to understand how different persons will perceive and process traumatic events. There are some people who will experience it, and when they experience it, they will just, you know, they'll say, you know what, I'm not going to just let me be the one who experiences all alone. I am going to tell other people about what is happening with me. So the trauma-sensitive approach will recognize all of that, but it also recognizes, most importantly, that every single person in that child's life, whether directly or indirectly, has a role to play. And there are three key elements to this approach. We have to start realizing, first of all, that trauma is here. It is not going away right now. It is impacting our children, and it is spread out in more ways than we think. And not only more ways than we think, but more ways than we will accept. We have to also recognize that it affects all individuals involved within the school. And I wanted to sort of like really spend a little bit of time on this, because I feel that the lady at the gate that sells the sweets to the kids and all those nice coconut drops and lunch and all of that, that person is involved in the child's life. The woman at the canteen, the watchman in the school, the lady who sits in the principal's office, the receptionist, not just the teachers and the administrators, but every single person that is in the child's life is going to be impacted by the trauma that this child experiences. And when we respond, we must respond by putting the knowledge that trauma affects everyone and that it is very prevalent. So those are the key elements to it. I kind of added this slide as well, because I believe that education and health, and I think I did it because, one, I call myself first and foremost an educator, and secondly, I call myself a clinician. And I feel that education and health are so intertwined. And if we want to have healthier community, healthier neighborhoods, if we want to have children who are healthy socially and psychologically, with good income and good resources, and who are exhibiting healthy behaviors, we have to provide the education that they need. And in order to provide that, we are going to have to pay attention to when they come to school. You know, the level of concentration. We have to pay attention to disabilities because it's an ongoing cycle. They are so interrelated. If education can provide great opportunities for health, then poor health is going to put the education at risk then. And so we have to then, as trauma sensitive professionals, look at all the context, all the factors that are involved. We have to look at the social policies. Is there any fairness? Do we have things in place that really attend and really address the issues that our children or families are experiencing when it comes to trauma? Because ultimately, the conditions throughout the person's life will affect both education as well as health. There are certain assumptions that are made of trauma-sensitive school, and I particularly like the first one because it ties in with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All children are born with needs for connection. That's why they latch on to mommy's breast the first thing when they're born. That is why when you hold them, they try to sort of snuggle even closer to you. They have a need for connection. They have a need to know that they're communicating with you and you are in tune with who they are. They want to know that they can trust the world, that they have the right to make decisions, and most of all, they have the right to love. Our children have all those needs. They're born with that. But here's the thing, as they get older, they are going to test their independence. They're going to test their interdependence as well, but they will do it in a safer way when their needs are met. If we can give them positive care, then we can help those children to regulate their emotions and their behaviors, and this can only lead to better health adaptation to their changing world. And their world change in incredible ways. Each stage of development is just absolutely awesome. I teach developmental psychology, and every time I teach this class, I get so excited. I teach nurses, nurses in training, teachers in training, counselors in training, pastors in training, and I get really excited because when I look at the children as they grow and as they meet their needs, as they develop physically and cognitively, socially and emotionally, it's absolutely amazing if we can just provide that kind of environment that will kind of make them thrive, grow and thrive. So these are some of the assumptions of the trauma-sensitive school. If we do not provide the healthy environment for our children, then it means that our children are going to feel disconnected from the world. They're not going to be able to regulate themselves, their emotions. They will not be able to balance themselves. They will not be as organized as we want them to be. And eventually, and sometimes, I won't even say eventually, many of our children who are traumatized feel emotionally disconnected. They feel isolated. Sometimes they sit and they wonder, is this happening to me? Why is it happening to me? And so many of them will experience feelings of isolation. So there are some principles that are basic to trauma-sensitive school. The first thing is we have to understand, and I talked a little bit about that earlier, we have to understand the prevalence and the impact of trauma. And that's what we are beginning to do now in this session and many sessions to come, I hope. We have to see the school through trauma-informed lenses. We have to say that this child has been traumatized. We have to say, what does that look like? So we use the word trauma a lot, but what does it mean? What does this trauma look like? Does it just mean the child is misbehaving? Is it that the child is isolating? Is it that the child is harming himself? Is it that the child is not learning? We have to look through those lenses. We also have to be prepared to use the relationships that we have every day when we go to school. We have to ensure that the relationships we have with our children will heal and will build our children school connectedness. Sometimes there is no connection for them in the home and in the community. And so we have to try to build that. We have to also be aware of the caregivers' capacity. Are the parents and the guardians really able to support the teachers, the administrators, as they walk through the process of developing and sustaining a trauma-sensitive school? And we also have to find ways and think of ways that we can empower our children or teachers or administrators. We have to figure out ways how we can also build resilience. So there are 3 pillars then that I have for trauma-informed care. And I really wanted to just very quickly go through them. The first one is safety. When we're talking about safety, we recognize that many of our children come from homes and communities where there is abuse, there is violence, there's shooting, murders, and there's long-term exposure that can be truly toxic for them. I think we all agree to that. When we provide safety for our children, what we are doing is providing an environment where there is calm, predictable, consistent, and focused presence of all the adults in the child's life. When the adults are attuned to the children, these children now will receive what you call positive feedback from them. They start understanding boundaries. They start receiving and giving respect. And they also realize that they can exercise their power to self-regulate. What is important here in a safe environment is that there is no power play. There is no, I am the boss and you're going to do what I say you're going to do. Okay? It's going to be where the child feels safe enough to express themselves, where they understand it's not a competition between me and the principal or the vice principal or the teachers who are those people who are in charge of discipline. It's a situation where I can be free to express myself. In this setting also, you are going to make sure that there are very clear expectations. Children operate when there are clear expectations. You know, one of the things I loved when I used to teach grade 2 and grade 3 was when we would make the rules together. And we would put up the chart on the board. And the children understood from the very beginning. By the end of week 3, they all understood what the expectations were in the class. We create routines for them that are well defined. When a child is kind of hypervigilant, they don't know how to sit still, they need to have well-defined routines. They need to have time to transition, because a simple thing like you walk into a child and tapping him on the shoulder and say, little Johnny, come on, we gotta go. The child might respond, you know, in a kind of way that is that reminds him of something that might have happened in his past. So you want to ensure that as you transition from one class to another, from one subject to another, from one activity to another, the child has that sense of moving in an orderly way. And what is important too is that we give them choices. It's in this environment, the adults are aware of the triggers in the school environment. And these are the smell, the sounds, the touch, the taste, and so on. Even fighting and screaming. These are signs that the sensitive teacher and administrators know. So in terms of connections now, the child who lacks health connections is hypervigilant and very wary. The adults in the child's life then is going to try to place some sort of corrective measures so that the child can make the connections in a normal way. These adults also will not engage in any power struggle, like I said before. Punishment is not going to be an integral part of the process. Threats are not going to be there. But here's the thing. Even as you create the connections with the children, they are going to test you. They are going to test you, and they are going to see how you will respond to their behaviors. Sometimes, though, they don't even realize that they are testing you. In fact, if you could look at it through the trauma-sensitive lens, that they are just being self-protective, and that they are kind of being defensive in a way, but this defensiveness is actually a transfer from the abuse and the neglect that they might have experienced before. So the child then might come off to you, especially when they're teenagers, as unsafe, and aggressive and assaultive. And in this case now, the school as a whole will set ground rules, and the students now will get a chance to voice what their needs are. And here you can now provide the positive connections with the adults as well as with their peers. Routines and rituals are good. They are great antidotes for chaos and disruptions. And of course, we're going to model the behavior so that the child can react in ways that are not reflective of the strong emotions that they are feeling. So if we come to the part where we are talking about regulation now, we want to teach our children how to self-soothe. When they're smaller, I know, for the most part, people think that a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old should not have a toy in the classroom. Sometimes that little teddy bear, that little, whatever it is, a little doll or something that they hold, sometimes that helps them to self-soothe. Sometimes you have to allow those children to regress just a little bit so that you can guide them forward into being more active and more able to regulate their emotions. So in a school like this, you're going to teach them how to self-soothe and to calm themselves. You help them to identify and appropriately express their emotions. You label their emotions. Sometimes our children come to us with very limited vocabulary, and sometimes we have to put the words in their mouths, so to speak, so that they can say, this is what I'm feeling. You're really, really upset right now. And they can say, yeah, and sometimes they might not even be able to agree with you. Another thing that you might want to do on a day-to-day basis in terms of regulating and managing their emotions is to incorporate calming activities throughout the day. I know that at the end of lunch break, usually when I taught the 2nd and the 3rd grade, I had that 15 minutes when my children would put their heads down on the desk. Some of them would fall asleep just because they're tired. But sometimes they need to have those calming exercises. It can be music. Some teachers are very, very creative when it comes to music. But when you have children who are traumatized, music can play a very, very important role in their work. And most importantly, please never ever be judgmental. These are the components and of the trauma-sensitive school. The administrators will have to make sure the staff is trained and supervised. You have to make sure that there is instruction that support neural development for the children. Look at the class management styles. Ensure that everything that you are doing is embedded in the policies and the procedures of the school. Pay attention to how everyone disciplines, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, whatever it is that you say to the child when you are going to discipline the child is going to be really important. And of course, you collaborate with the community agencies.
You have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes. Okay. So what can administrators do? Provide the teachers with regular professional development. Direct the school towards mentoring and fostering attitudes of belonging. Make sure that you develop a climate that values diversity, and also keep that spirit of optimism. Make sure that everybody believes that it can happen. Provide encouragement and specific feedback to the teachers, and always encourage the teachers to mentor the older teachers, the more experienced teachers, to mentor the newer teachers as they come in. What can teachers do? Several things, and I'm going to stop myself, but I talked about no judgment. I talked about supporting the children in terms of regulation. Always celebrate their successes. And please remain objective when de-escalating any kind of aggressive behaviors. And there are all these suggestions. I promise I can send the PowerPoint to you and you can go through all of them. Okay? And so I am going to stop here because I am out of time, I believe, right, Dwayne?
Yeah. Well, we want to stop a little bit to ask a few questions. We have a few important questions we want to ask. But just so you know, participants, Dr. Bradford here will be on again with our professional development sessions for her task force. She's the chair of, tell them a little bit, Dr. Bradford.
I am the chair of the Behavioral Health Task Force. I am really seeking to have a strong alliance with the teachers as well as the counselors in Jamaica. We have an ongoing relationship with JDC as it is now. And so we will be providing as many training, developmental workshops, whatever it is, that will support the teachers as well as the counselors in Jamaica.
Yes, good. So you'll have a whole bunch of things coming up in the near future. All right, so let's hit the questions quickly, see if we can go through 2 or 3 of them. The first one is it possible for a child to display oppositional defiance disorder from as early as early childhood stage?
Usually they try to, or we try to delay the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder until later, maybe in the teens or so, but we will more focus on conduct disorder. So it's not necessarily the defiance, but you can in fact see several of the signs that lead to the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. Another one is it at all possible that a child might display some of these symptoms that you went through without being traumatized?
Unless the child has I would say, a brain deficiency, or the child has some physical illness, if the child is brought up in or nurtured and nourished in a particular way, then it's very hard for the child to display these behaviors. Now, when I say that, I'm going to kind of put it in a little bit of a sort of with a question mark, because children live what they learn as well. And if they learn that they can get away with certain behaviors because this is what they're seeing around them, then they can pattern the behavior as well. So monkey see, monkey do. That's what I always say. And sometimes they do it and they don't even know that they're doing it. You can take a child who is 5 years old and they can do every single dance move that those people on YouTube is doing, right? Why? Because their brain is at the stage where learning is at its highest potential. And so they're learning it really quickly and they're kind of like parroting it or sort of just doing what they see done. And if they do it long enough, then it becomes a habit and it becomes a part of their daily delivery.
Okay. Final question for you this afternoon. How do traumatized adults or educators deal effectively with traumatized children?
They have to get help first.
Mm-hmm.
They literally have to get help because they have to work through their trauma, because in the same way that the children respond to the triggers, the adults also will respond to certain triggers as well.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bradford, and the wonderful comments. They're very wonderful. Many of them in the chat. Excellent presentation, and they can't wait for the follow-up from this one.
Yes.
There were some comments too on that they need, people need help in especially early childhood training in teachers' colleges, and also while they're being employed as early childhood teachers and elementary too, they need help, ongoing professional development in this area because it's serious. Somebody mentioned in crime-ridden areas, they need this more than ever. So very informative.
And please know that that's why we're here. I have a team of psychologists, counselors, social workers, people who are in the helping field who are only too well to help as much as we can.
Yes. Okay, now, thank you so much, Dr. Bradford.